Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and it is election season. And once again, this show, you'll be watching it next Tuesday, which is the 20th of October. But we are taping it a few days ahead of time because on the 20th is a Board of Ed candidate forum at the Science and Technology Magnet School. So unfortunately, you can't call in, but you can contact us at any time in the future if you have any questions about what we talk about. So tonight's guest is Tim Hanser. He is a Green Party candidate for City Council, and we're going to talk about city matters for the next 55 minutes. So welcome, Tim.
Thank you.
So I guess we can start and just talk about what your background is and why you're interested in being on City Council.
Sure. A lot of people know me in the community, know I've been involved for many years. I'll go back to kind of the beginning of my involvement with the city, which pretty much dates to almost the time I moved here. I moved here in 2001 for a job with Pfizer. I bought a house in the Riverside Park neighborhood in April of 2002, April 15th. I never forget the day because of tax day.
Wow.
2002. And my involvement really started with the neighborhood and with the park. The park was not being maintained. The neighborhood had some issues, whether it was through activities that were really not appropriate or just people not maintaining their properties. I tried working with the city to see what changes could be made, what efforts could be put into maintaining the park and addressing some of the other issues. I think some of the police-related issues were addressed, which was great to see. The maintenance issues with regards to private property as well as the city's property was not really being addressed. So I continued to try to push the city to really make some changes, but at the same time I said I can't sit around and wait for somebody else to take action. So starting in 2004, I started organizing park cleanups. We had cleanups every month pretty much, except for the winter months from late 2004 till 2007. We really made a lot of progress in that park during that time. Just little things, getting the litter taken care of, cutting down some of the overgrowth.
I remember a lot of greenbrier. Yes,
a lot of greenbrier, lots of, I still remember the poison ivy wrapped up the ladder of the slide. There were lots of just really simple things that needed to be done. And there was a pretty hardy group of volunteers, you were one of them, who really worked very hard. What became evident during that process was, despite really a fair amount of diligence from a pretty large group of people, we weren't really able to make a huge amount of headway. What that says to me is that volunteers are really valuable and really very important in our community, but without the professionals also being involved, you're always kind of sliding just slower down the slope. Backwards.
There are really limitations to what volunteers can do.
Absolutely. And the kind of flash forward a couple of years, or even during that time frame, there's been multiple efforts to sell portions of that park or repurpose portions of that park. It started with the Children's Museum,
right.
Which I think really just collapsed not because of resistance, but because lack of funding. The second one was the Marine Science Magnet School. That project had a lot of traction. I was the head of my neighborhood group at the time, so we had a lot of conversations, and quite honestly, there wasn't consensus within the neighborhood. Some people really thought it was a good idea, some people thought it was a terrible idea, most people were somewhere in between. At the end, the decision was made to build it in Groton as opposed to New London. I think in the end, that was a better decision for the neighborhood and for that park. But that wasn't the end of our pressures with that park. The most recent potential repurpose was a sale of a significant portion of it, the heart of the park, to the United States Coast Guard for, I guess, expansion of their campus. There was a lot of debate about this, and it really came down to about 15 votes.
It did, and the issue lingered for probably about 18 months because when the council approved the sale and the petitions were submitted for a referendum, the referendum date was set a year in the future.
Right. Yeah, but you know, I bring that up because while the volunteerism that was taking place for the previous several years certainly wasn't the only factor in determining
Right.
the outcome of that park, it certainly played a significant role. And I think that's the message that I want to make sure that voters and residents understand, that decisions are not set in stone and outcomes are not predetermined. They are only predetermined when you take no action. If you involve yourself and you commit the time and energy, which can be very challenging and very frustrating, you can influence outcomes. And I'd like to think that those efforts really did influence the outcome. And 4 years later, if we were to have a vote again, I don't think the outcome would be quite as 50-50 as it was 4 years ago. I think the opinion of that park has changed for the better dramatically in the last 4 years because of continued volunteer efforts and finding multiple groups really to work within that park. I think it's a great model for us to look at within the city. How do we bring different people with different ideas and different visions together to work on something that's a common cause for the betterment of the city as a whole?
And of course, a piece of that is now that the city does not neglect the park to the extent that it was neglected. Maybe we'll talk a little bit later about the limitations of our Parks Department, but you know, in the key areas of the park, the lawn is always mowed now. People who live on Bowles Avenue, they can see into the park from their back decks.
Right.
That was not the case 5 years ago.
And that's a big piece to the success of the park. Visibility through the park, into the neighborhood is a huge value. It's a huge asset for that park. For the people who live on Bowles Avenue, they've got better views of the river. It is probably the nicest view that the city has. Some might dispute that. Some who live on the south end of town and have kind of unobstructed views of the Long Island Sound might dispute that. But when you get to look at the river and you see the Oddfellows property across the river,
Yes.
it really is quite striking. And I'm so happy that we are able to maintain that for the city of New London and its residents.
Right, and Winthrop School, which, you know, for me, that was one of the reasons that I became involved in preventing the sale, was the Winthrop students use it as a tremendous resource as their hands-on science lab.
Right, it's an asset we have. It's an asset where I think we're taking better advantage of. And I think, you know, kind of tying back to one of the reasons why I'm running is we have so many assets within this community. We have natural assets of, like our parks and our beaches. We also have built environment assets. We have really quite a diverse array of architecture dating from the late 1700s all the way to modern architecture. And there's really some great examples of architecture in all eras. We need to find ways to use these assets to our advantage. And I recognize that we are sitting, in that regard, we are sitting in a position of strength within the region, not a position of weakness. And when we recognize that we're in a position of strength, we can leverage our assets better and we make better decisions for the present day, but also, and I think more importantly, for the future.
And that is a huge consideration when we see decisions that have been made over the last 50 years.
Yep.
Now, over the last few years, of course, you've gotten a more inside look of city government. So how do you feel as though that can inform how you would behave as a city councilor, what you would bring to it?
So as you know, I was the public works director for 3.5 years for the city. It's a very difficult job, I think anywhere, but I think it's particularly difficult in the city of New London. When you look at the maintenance needs of the city's infrastructure, and when I mean infrastructure, I'm not talking simply roads, streets, sidewalks, shade trees, street lights, city buildings, school buildings, public parks, and other public spaces. There's a lot that we are responsible for. The amount of funds and staffing dedicated to that upkeep is just, there is no argument. It is insufficient. I don't think I've heard anybody say very loudly at least, that there is plenty of staffing to actually take care of this. During budget cycles every year, the consensus among city councilors was there's a distinct lack of staff within the Public Works Department. It didn't translate into increased funding, but there was at least a recognition of that. Just to kind of give a couple of examples, just to kind of hit it home. I know people sometimes say I really spend a lot of time on this, but I think it is really critical to understand. The city of New London has about 270, 300 acres of land that it needs to maintain between its parks, school grounds, city grounds, medians, and things like that. They have a staff of 6 people to do that maintenance. Compare that to Electric Boat, that has 18 acres of land outside of its buildings, and they have a contracted staff of 5. Now, we have 6 for 300, and they have 5 for 18. And when you look at Conn College and the Coast Guard Academy's numbers, they are more in line with what you're seeing with Electric Boat in terms of how many people you have dedicated per acre than what we have. So that would suggest to me that somebody has said, or even just by coincidence, they've all figured out this is kind of the proportion of people to land that you need, and we are so far away from that number that it should come as no surprise that there is always a mad scramble to try to keep things up. And just to continue to drive the point, because I think it's one key detail, when you look at the 5 for Electric Boat versus 6 for the City of New London, Electric Boat's not dealing with litter, by and large. They're not line striping ball fields. There is basically one of those 6 people who's dedicated to lining ball fields from April to November. That is his job, almost 24/7. Well, not literally 24/7, but he doesn't do much else because there is that much work to do for one person. And there's another person who's pretty much dedicated to picking up litter. And that's pretty much all he does because that is the need.
Right.
So I think understanding that is really important. It's not to say that the performance of individuals couldn't improve. Absolutely they can improve. But to expect that to be the solution to the problem, I think is really short-sighted. Kind of jumping to buildings, because I think buildings are even more acute of a problem. We have gone into a system with our schools where we have a magnet school model. We have decided that the solution for the challenges we faced in our school system has been to find ways to bring students in from out of district, to encourage them to come to our schools and raise the performance levels of our schools, which will benefit all students. And I think it's an interesting model. I'm very enthusiastic about it. I think we have a great superintendent who's really the right man for the job. But with that transition, there is going to be a far greater expectation of the maintenance of those facilities. The Board of Education does not have a maintenance staff. They have a janitorial staff, but they do not have a maintenance staff. So they share the maintenance staff with the city, which is all housed in the Public Works Department. And in that Public Works Department, there are 5 people.
That's all together.
That's all together.
For all the schools, all the city buildings.
You have 2 electricians, you have a carpenter, you have a foreman, and you have a laborer.
And no plumber.
No plumber, which usually surprises people. To the best of my knowledge, the city has never had a plumber, which just doesn't seem like a really cost-effective approach. It's a position I tried very hard to get. I felt it was not only would improve quality of service, but it would actually be at a lower cost. When you also consider that those 2 electricians are also tasked with taking care of the city's streetlights, so they're not even in any building many days. There's about 1 day a week they're dedicating to streetlights, except in the middle of the winter. And it can kind of go on and on. There's parks, there's buildings within parks that they have to maintain, and it's just, you look at it, and again, are there performance issues with individuals? Sure, we can get better performance out of these people. But even if you quadruple their productivity, there just simply is not enough staff to go around. Either we need to find a way to increase that staffing level, and that's a challenge, or we need to find ways to contract out some of those services. Either way, we need to find ways to dedicate more resources to this, because this is the golden egg that we are hoping will hatch, that the schools are a huge component of our economic development approach for the next 20, 30 years that we are banking on. We need to dedicate our energies into making sure that it works.
And there are a lot of potential difficulties that have to be overcome. We'll have a lot more students in the system than we have over the last 10, 20 years, and I'm not sure that's totally been accounted for. Now, in terms of city council, what can city council do to help solve these issues with maintenance?
Well, I think one of the things that's really important is that the city council understand cause and effect. That when you do not fund maintenance, what you are doing is you are just pushing the costs down the road. You are not avoiding the cost. City governments do not go out of business. Even governments that go bankrupt still continue to exist. It is not a business. And I think that's an important distinction between the business world and the government world. That governments, except if there's a violent revolution, which I hope to not see in this country ever, or ever again, I should say, government doesn't go out of business. So you can say, I'm not going to spend the money now, but it's a pay me now or pay me later proposition, and usually at a greater cost.
Yeah, I was going to say, it doesn't remain a flat line item. If a roof isn't repaired, for example, that can be an exponential rise in cost.
Absolutely. A roof is a great example that if you replace the roof in a timely manner, you have minimized the damage of anything below that roof. But if you continue to let it leak and really expose the building to the elements, you are now not only repairing that roof, but you're spending money to repair the damage done by the failure of that roof. It's a challenge that the city council faces, that the city faces. We have very limited financial resources, but investing within our infrastructure is money well spent. And quite frankly, it's money we need to spend, because we're going to spend it no matter what, because either we're going to do it in a planned manner, or there's going to be an emergency, and we're going to have to spend the money anyway, probably at a greater cost.
Well, when you're in emergency mode, suddenly you don't look at balancing the budget so much.
Right.
You're just trying to keep your head above water,
right,
at whatever cost.
And I think, and from a city council perspective, I think the other thing to consider is, who are we serving? Who are our elected officials serving? The elected officials are serving the residents and the businesses and the visitors of the city of New London. If we want our residents and our businesses and our visitors to feel that we value them, then it behooves us to maintain our public spaces and to maintain our infrastructure. When somebody comes into town and they see, in general, roads that are in poor condition, sidewalks that are in poor condition, public spaces that are in poor condition, the impression they get is this is a community that does not value me coming into this community and either moving here, opening a business here, or just coming in to spend money here. And that really hurts everybody. It's not something that is effective for the city to move forward. It's not an effective growth strategy. I've talked about during the candidate forums stormwater issues. Every heavy rainfall, Bank Street and Broad Street flood, and people know that. So when you look in the areas where the flooding is most acute, you will see a pretty strong correlation into a lack of maintenance and investment in those facilities that are directly adjacent to that roadway. There's a reason for that. There's a cause and an effect. And we need to consider those causes and effects. And our effects should be that we have happier residents, we have happier businesses, and we have happier visitors, because we have told them through our actions that we value them.
And, going back to streets and sidewalks, during this time of year, of course, you do a lot of knocking on doors and a lot of looking and walking on the sidewalks. And I have to say, almost every resident, you can just point at a bit of sidewalk not far away and say, we want to get this fixed.
Right, exactly. And it was a resident I spoke with a few weeks ago who lives near the hospital, and she works at the hospital, and has just had a knee replacement, and she walks to work every day because it is not effective for her to drive. Sure. I mean, even if she wanted to drive, it would take, by the time she parked, she could have walked.
Hey, she'd be parking in a lot and taking a shuttle.
But her comments to me were, one, the condition of the sidewalks along Ocean Avenue are poor, and that with a knee replacement, it's something that makes her very uncomfortable. And in the wintertime, we're not enforcing clearing of snow on private property So she's either trudging through the snow and ice or walking in the street, neither of which is something we want to see people doing. So it goes beyond just the maintenance, it goes into enforcement. If we want to value our community, we need to dedicate resources to making sure that in the wintertime, we make sure that property owners clear their snow from their sidewalks in a timely manner. Again, I understand that there's the challenge of resources, but it comes down to what are we prioritizing as a community?
And just my own editorializing, in terms of business properties, sometimes they clear their parking lot and they don't clear their sidewalks.
Absolutely.
And that would be one of my pet peeves. So I guess we can kind of move from this into economic development, because we're talking about how businesses can thrive here and also how we can make our current residents happier, but also bring more residents into the city.
Yeah, so in the last 50 years, the city's economic development approach has been kind of a top-down, large-scale development model. From the 2 urban renewal projects, one on the north side of downtown, which I believe was called the Winthrop Cove urban renewal project, and you have the Shaw's Cove project as well. Whole areas of the city were cleared. In many cases, the street grid was disrupted, roads were closed, and parcels were combined to redevelop them. In some cases, those parcels have been developed. In other cases, they have not. I think most would argue that the Shaw's Cove redevelopment project was successful, yet we still have, despite this success from a tax perspective, we still have this very large parcel of land known as Parcel J at the corner of Bank and Howard Street, which is a very key location.
You think it's a very prime location for commercial development.
And so that, to me, shows that even in this most successful models, leaving a large vacant lot for the last 35 years in the heart of the city would show that approach, even in its best case scenario, is maybe not really an effective approach for making this a community where people feel valued, where people will want to walk down the streets, where it feels like this is a successful community. Flash forward many years, and we have the whole Fort Trumbull redevelopment, which has been. I don't know how at this point anybody can defend the actions taken, whether they agreed with it at the time or not. Mistakes can be made, and you can change your mind. The fact of the matter is that now 10 years later, after the court ruling, no development has taken place.
And that's including along Howard Street, where Huey's small business and residences were there and owned, and taxes were paid on
and we have gone through, since the beginning of that project in the late 90s, early 2000s, we have gone through a few economic cycles. So arguments I have heard in the past is, we had a slight recession in the early 2000s, that's why it didn't get developed. Okay, then we had a slight boom, still nothing got developed. So, the reality of it is that when you make these huge parcels of land available and you say you must develop the whole parcel, what you've done is you've just limited how many people can actually do the job. There aren't that many big developers in the world. There are lots and lots of small developers. And we need to think about how can we get things built, how can we get things fixed up, because at the end of the day, tax revenue is the whole goal of this was to raise tax revenue. And right now, there is not a drop of tax revenue that is being raised from this land that was cleared. Not a dollar. We have a net loss when you look at that land, because the thing to remember is the electric boat property was not taken through that process. The Coast Guard R&D property was also not taken during that process. Those were completely different projects. There's strong evidence that there were some hands in the cookie jar. But the fact of the matter is that the land between those two areas was where the land was taken, and you've not seen any development. There's been 2 efforts to develop the property in the last 10 years. Both of those efforts have failed, and part of the reason they failed is because it's kind of this home run approach to development. And when you're a home run hitter in baseball, you often are about a 200 maybe
Right.
225 batter. It's great when you actually hit them, but you strike out a lot too.
Yeah, and it's an expensive and risky way to go about things. And, you know, we don't have it with us, but if you look at the buildings that existed in Fort Trumbull before they were all cleared, some were really good buildings.
Sure.
Some were not. But I guess we can think about downtown and some of the areas near downtown. If you look lot by lot at redeveloping places that are vacant, buildings that are falling down, there's a lot less risk involved and a lot more people in the pool who can do it.
Yeah, and I kind of, to kind of jump off from that point, the housing stock and the building stock within the fort, in a lot of ways, isn't vastly different than the housing stock and building stock that still exists in the Shaw Street corridor. I mean, these are
Absolutely.
These are adjacent neighborhoods. They developed around the same period of time, so they have certain similarities. And I bring that up because you have an area of the city that's about a mile long and not quite a half mile wide that runs from Bank Street to School Street, or you could call it the hospital, however you want to look at it, and from Howard Street to Ocean Avenue. That is a parcel that is by and large residential, though there is some mixed use in that area and some that is office. Having walked through those neighborhoods, I was actually surprised to see how many houses were vacant or in disrepair. Those are opportunities. They're challenges, but any challenge brings an opportunity. This is back to the idea of maintenance. This is what we have already. We should be maintaining what we have. What have we done as a community, as a city, to encourage reinvestment in that area? And I would say very little. When you look at the edges of that area, you have three large employment centers for the city of New London. You have Electric Boat, you have L&M, with their property not only on Montauk and Ocean, but they're also their property on Howard Street. And then you have Shaw's Cove. Between those four employment centers, you have about 7,500 employees, which has created another problem with a great opportunity.
Boy, I drive through Pequot all the time, and the parking is crazy. And Fort Trumbull area, the one thing it is being used for is cars during the workday.
And anybody who is trying to get from Pequot Avenue to downtown knows that there is a window in the afternoon that you better think about how you're going to get there, because it's going to, and how long it's going to take you, because there is a significant amount of traffic. Now,
so we can solve more problems than one.
Right. Now, rather than looking at this as simply a problem, this is a good problem for us to have. Our problem is we have people who are here every day. That is a great problem for us to be dealing with. And our problem is that we have traffic that we didn't have when Pfizer was in that building. And our problem is we have parking issues that we've never had before. When you look at where these places sit, and then you say, there's this neighborhood literally adjacent to this that has a lot of housing stock that could really use some reinvestment. You say to yourself, is there a way for me to reduce my parking problems, reduce my traffic problems, and reinvest in the community at the same time? And I think there is. I think there are real opportunities there. You're not going to get everybody to buy into this, but you don't need to get everybody to buy in. And I think that's the beauty.
Even if 10% of the employees considered moving in here, it would be huge.
Oh, if we had 10%, we would have a housing crunch. We'd have real problems with housing and housing affordability. But even if you look at it from this perspective, that's a pool of 7,500 employees. Let's say it's not 10%. Let's say it's 1%. That's 75 households. The housing stock within that area consists of about 400 properties. Some are single families, some are two families, some are three families, some are upwards of three families. If you were to get 75 people into these 400 units, and I can tell you there are not 75 that are vacant. You are seeing a reinvestment in a neighborhood that is in need of reinvestment just because of the age of its housing stock. It is at its point in its life cycle that needs reinvestment. You have now taken those cars off the street for parking, because parking's such a pain, they'll walk to work. You've taken those cars off of Howard Street and the downtown corridor, who aren't stopping anyway, who are driving to wherever they may live now, and you are putting them into a neighborhood. You are raising the values of those properties, particularly the ones that are vacant. So you're addressing two problems the city faces with traffic and parking, and you're raising your tax revenue. And there really is no risk involved, because if you say to one person, here's a $25,000 forgivable loan, which has been done in the past, because you work in the city of New London, here's $25,000, you have a 5-year forgivable loan, which means that you must live in this property for a minimum of 5 years, otherwise you have to pay us money back. Worst case scenario is somebody buys a property with this money, spends the money in the property, and tries to flip the house within a year. Well, what do we get? We get most of the money back, and we get an improved property.
Right.
It's really no risk at all. It's a very low risk, I should say.
And we had the housing conservation program for many years that dealt with things like lead abatement and code violations. And it was fantastic, and people who used it, even if they did flip the house within a year or two, they also felt as though they got a good deal.
Right. I think looking for ways to develop that are low risk, small projects, that's a proven winner that's been done in many places. We need to be reinvesting in our neighborhoods anyway. Why don't we find ways to fill these houses and address other issues that we face because people who are working within the city of New London are not living within the city of New London. I feel that the commitment the city has made to improving its education system was before we made that commitment, that was one of the barriers to families moving into the city of New London. That was a very common statement, that the schools are poor quality. I'm not going to live in New London. I have children in schools. I can't do this. Well, we've addressed that, and the schools have improved dramatically, and I have a feeling that they will continue to improve under Dr. Rivera's leadership. So what's our next barrier? Our next barrier is we have housing stock that is not necessarily very expensive, but it needs a lot of work.
Right.
So how do we lower that bar for people to get access to that house and fix it up? And even if we were to provide, the city were to provide 10 grants a year, it's $250,000 out of an $85 million budget. And in return, we get an increased grand list because we've increased the value of that property. So we're getting that money back.
What?
We're getting the money back. I mean, it's as simple as that. It may not be today, but within 10 years, that money is coming back into the city's coffers. It is a reinvestment approach that can be successful.
Of course, the one thing the city would have to invest in that would be worthwhile but might not be a revenue stream is if all these people are walking to work. We do need to fix the sidewalks, really.
Absolutely, and that would be something we would have to address. But if you go through that neighborhood today or that area today at lunchtime, electric boat employees do a lot of walking. Which is great to see. It's great to see them out on the streets. Some I think are just going to get some fresh air and a little exercise. Some are going to get something to eat. But for whatever reason they're out there, they are out there walking now. And to be quite honest, on the main streets within that area, the sidewalks, compared to the rest of the city, are in fairly good condition because many of them have been repaired in the last 15 years. So we do have that problem. But again, this is a good problem for us to have. People want new sidewalks because they're walking on them. Hey, I'll take it.
Yeah, because previously people were not walking and complaining that they're not walking because the sidewalks are bad. And that is still happening in some neighborhoods.
Yeah. And I think just to kind of say one more thing about this whole discussion, I think the small model approach is really an opportunity for real success. That said, we do have large parcels that need to be redeveloped. That doesn't mean that we stop looking at those opportunities. It doesn't mean that we stop trying to see what we can do in the Fort Trumbull area or in other parts of the city. It just means that we're not only doing that. And I think that's maybe the take-home message. When anybody's investing for their retirement, they don't put everything into high-risk stocks.
Right.
I mean, if they come out...
I hope they don't.
Well, right.
They're not advised
nobody advises you to do that. They tell you to kind of balance your risk. You have some low-risk investments. Yes, they have lower interest rates, but you know the money's coming in. And you have some medium and you have some high risks. It's the same idea with economic development. Don't stick to just high risk. You've got to broaden your risk portfolio. You've got to make sure that you are doing some low-risk options. Yeah, they don't pay big bucks, but they pay, and they pay every time. So, what I mean is, what I'm trying to make sure is clear is, yes, we have high-risk opportunities, and we should continue to look at those opportunities. But we also have low-risk ones that we've been ignoring that we need to bring into the fold, because together they will provide a much better opportunity for success.
Well, thank you. Let's see. I wanted to talk a little bit about, as you know, the last 4 years there has been a huge amount of jockeying between the mayor and the council. And from an outsider point of view, it hasn't all seemed really productive. So as we move into a new phase, perhaps, of our current form of government, how would you recommend, from the point of view of a counselor, how to get beyond this and really have an effective mayor and an effective council that provide checks and balances, but not high drama?
Right. From the inside looking out, I can tell you that there was a lot of these problems as well. I think in hindsight, there's a certain amount of reality that we should have expected this. We changed our form of government dramatically, and I don't know if that was really comprehended by people. And it was a dramatic shift from a city manager form of government to a mayor form of government. They are really very, very different structures. There's always growing pains. That said, there are some issues with our charter that do not outline roles and responsibilities. So those need to be looked at. How do we make sure we clarify some of that language? Clarity really does help with behavior. That said, the problems really lie beyond what it says on a piece of paper, and that we went through a transition. There is a reticence by either side to really decide that they're working together. Even if they disagree, they need to work together for the city. That comes down to people. That comes down to individuals. You could have the best written policies and procedures you want, but if they're thrown out the window every opportunity they get, which I can tell you from the mayor's office as well as the city council, are not following sections of the charter. They selectively follow sections of the charter. And the reality is that's probably going to be a problem we always face, no matter how well written that charter is. So again, it comes down to who you elect. How much are the elected officials willing to work together? How much are they willing to abide by the charter, and how much are they willing to work together? I saw a system that could have gotten a lot more work done if people just said, hey, I'm going to put my personal differences aside and I'm going to work with you. I think that seeing that from the inside and really being really negatively impacted in my job because of it, I mean, I have no incentive, I have no interest in creating this problem for anybody else. It was really an awful experience to have to be stuck in the middle sometimes. It wasn't productive for the staff, but most importantly, it wasn't productive for the city. It wasn't productive for our residents. We need to get past that. We need to not continue to have personal tiffs within public discussions. If there's a problem you have with an individual, you have it privately. You don't do it on air during a city council meeting.
And unfortunately, it seems as though the mainstream media kind of exacerbates the problem because, the high drama, the high tension I don't think it sells papers, but it's perceived to.
Well, I would say that the Day has followed a model for many years where airing New London's challenges sells newspapers. I've worked through my job in the city, I've worked with other communities and other people within other communities, and I could tell you they have their problems. There are some communities in this area who probably have more turmoil in their government than we
Absolutely.
do, but they don't air their dirty laundry, and the Day isn't looking for it. So knowing that, we need to be a lot smarter about how we talk
True.
about things, because when a city councilor decides to, or a mayor, decides to make an issue that's really a personal issue and just kind of makes everybody look bad, what happens if a developer's watching that? Are they going to come into the city now? No, they're going to go somewhere else. They're not going. They don't want to deal with it. People don't want to deal with drama. So we need to find individuals who really are averse to drama, and I am pretty averse to drama. What I've always said to people is, drama will come find you. You don't need to go looking for it. So that is my mantra. I avoid seeking out drama because I know at some point it will come find me anyway, and I'll deal with it when it gets there.
And that is one of the ironies of running for political office, I think, because sometimes candidates get attention because they have a more flamboyant style, and that is not necessarily the right skill set for doing the job, though it might be a great skill set for getting elected.
Yeah, and that's something I've definitely said to people. The skill sets necessary to get elected often do not coincide with the skill sets necessary to do the job. Getting elected requires a lot of charisma, strength in public speaking, able to relate to many different people on a personal level. In the reality of the job, I mean, it's a day-to-day grind, it's a week-to-week grind where it's diligence, it's stick-to-itiveness, it's persistence, it's working with people you don't like personally, but you work with them professionally because that's what is in front of you. Those are skills that don't require charisma. They don't require these other things. It doesn't mean that if you're charismatic, you can't have these skills. That's a really important piece to understand, that what we are electing is not the person that's going to be the best dinner guest. We're electing the person who's going to be the one who's going to be the hardest working and looking out for the best interests of the city now and in the future.
And now, I guess, a little bit of a Green Party plug is the Green Party seems to, in New London at least, seems to have a lot of experience working with people on issues, even if we're not best friends.
No, absolutely. We stick to the issue and we work with that issue. It doesn't mean that we agree on everything else, and that's okay. We're never going to find 100% agreement. We work with who is a partner for that project, and then if we disagree on something else, we don't work together, and that's okay. It's not personal, it's professional. And I think that often gets lost. I've been asked by a couple of people when I've been canvassing, who do you intend on caucusing with? And my response has basically said, it depends on the issue. If there's a project where there's me and a Republican and a Democrat and maybe an unaffiliated person, we all find common ground, hey, let's work together, let's make this happen. But if there's another project where the four of us are actually not together, that's okay, I'll work with somebody else on this issue. And that's really how government should be working, that we find common ground, we find ways to come together as opposed to find ways to divide ourselves. And I think it's been a long-standing challenge that New London has faced, is that we tend to grab onto divisive issues rather than cohesive issues.
And my experience on the school board was that Greens can help that kind of working together happen, because there were a few issues in which the Republicans I served with, who were Barbara Major and Jason Catala, and I would agree on an issue, and we really just had to convince one of the four Democrats that there was merit in pursuing this. And so we did have a lot of tripartisan things happening that I thought were all positive developments for the schools, trying to open the schools up to the community, trying to get Board of Ed meetings recorded, which they are now, but weren't then. So I think sometimes being a Green, perhaps an other kind of independent candidate as well, can help get Republicans and Democrats to work together as well.
Yeah, we can kind of function as the glue between the two sides.
I think we have a ballot here. I'm not quite sure how much time we have because we're not on the hour, but maybe we can talk a little bit about what the ballot looks like and how people can vote.
Yeah, no,
it's
very important that that when you vote, that you understand how the ballot is laid out and how you could actually cast your votes. In this November's election, there are three races. There is the mayoral race, the city council race, and the Board of Education race. There are two candidates for mayor. there are 17 candidates for city council, and there are 12 candidates, I believe, for Board of Education. For the mayoral race, I think that's a very simple, straightforward race. There are 2 candidates, you choose one candidate. The choices are either Michael Passero or Bill Vogel. And for anybody who doesn't know Bill's first name, he appears on the ballot as Raymond Vogel, but that is Bill Vogel. Those are in column A. It gets more complicated when you get to council and Board of Education. There are 17 people, like I said, for the city council race. And we're kind of,
And they're not
I'm going to
just in the
try
list.
to show on the camera and probably not have a lot of success. But what you'll see is all of these candidates in this area here are city council candidates, kind of like a blob of candidates. And you can choose any 7, up to 7. You don't have to cast 7 votes, but you can choose up to any 7. It doesn't matter if they're one above the other, you can choose both of them. If they're right next to each other, you can choose both of those as well. So I think that's a really important piece to understand. You're not obliged to vote for just one party. You can cast a vote for a Democrat, a Republican, a Green, and a petitioning candidate, and there are no official write-ins, but if you were so moved to put somebody's name there, you could even do that. You can vote one person, you can vote 7 people, you can vote anything in between. The same goes for the Board of Education. I'm going to see if I can slide this over to show this. So there are 12 candidates, but there should be 11 different names. Am I looking at that right? 7, 10, 11, yes. So that's because Myrna Martinez has been cross-endorsed by the Republicans. She's a Green Party candidate. I will put a plug in for her. She's awesome. Vote for her. Even if you don't vote for me, vote for her. She's an incumbent. She's done great work on the board. You can vote for any 7 of these candidates. If you cast a vote twice for Myrna, it only counts once. Just so it's understood. It doesn't get voided, it just doesn't get counted twice. So if you think that casting 2 votes for Myrna somehow gets her 2 votes, it only gives her 1. If you're just really enthusiastic about Myrna and want to do that, by all means do it. It's not going to hurt your ballot, it's not going to make it invalid, it's just not going to count for 2, it's only going to count for 1. So again, you have your 12 people in this area, any 12, it doesn't matter if one's above the other, you can vote for both of them. You can both vote for people on one side or the other of a person you prefer.
Right, and up to 7.
Up to 7. You can vote for 1, you can vote for 7, you could vote for any number in between.
And someday maybe we'll get a better ballot, because I don't think people in Connecticut realize it, but in most states, the names are just listed.
Yeah, no, there's a real challenge with this ballot. I think it does create a lot of confusion for people, having feedback from different people, and have shown this ballot to newer voters in the area, and you can certainly see the look of confusion on their face, because it's not straightforward. It's really important to have an opportunity to look at it in advance and really understand it, because it can be overwhelming. It really
Yes.
can. There are a lot of names on this piece of paper, and they're not obviously grouped. They are grouped. They are grouped. I don't want to say they're not grouped. They are very clearly grouped, but it's not immediately obvious when you look at it. It can be a little overwhelming. So if you ever have a chance to review the ballot ahead of time, please do so. If you have any questions about how to fill out a ballot, we can certainly help. Our office is at 225 State Street. We are clearly a partisan group, but we're not going to tell you who to vote for when we're showing you how to use a ballot. That's your decision. We respect your decision. You can also talk to the Registrar of Voters. The League of Women Voters also can help out. I'm sure the Democrats and Republicans would be very willing to help out. So if you have a question about a ballot, do not hesitate to ask the question. Even when you're at the polling station, there are people there, and they're there to help provide that instruction for you. It is okay to not understand how it works. Some people are new voters, and we want to encourage new voters. Some people are old voters. You only see this every 2 years. So, you may want to get a refresher. Don't hesitate to ask a question. If you make a mistake, do not hesitate to let them know. They will tear up the ballot, and they will give you a new one. There is no reason to not fill this out as a well-informed voter. You have a lot of opportunity ahead of the election, but also on election day to really get a lot of information as to how to fill out a ballot. Learning about the candidates will require some diligence ahead of the day, but when you're there and you know who you want to vote for, make sure you know how to fill it out so you're casting the votes that you want to cast.
And it is not available now, but I assume it will be within about this week, that the Secretary of State's office does have their ballots posted online. They started that about 2 or 3 years ago. So you can go to their site, they'll have the date of the election, you punch your town, your district, and you can examine the ballot ahead of time.
Now, does that include the instructions that come with the ballot?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay, because there's a statement on the top of the ballot that says, be sure to read the instructions on the reverse side of this ballot. Obviously, this is a photocopy and it's blank on the back. That is something you can certainly get from the clerk's office, from the registrar's office. If we can get a copy of it, we'll have it in our office as well. Again, there's opportunities to learn how to use this. Make sure you do it. Exercise your rights to cast a vote, be involved. And I think the one last plug on local elections is local elections are the election you have the most impact in. There's the fewest number of voters of any vote that you cast, just by the very nature of the beast. That means that your vote has more impact on the outcome than any other vote. And more, even kind of beyond that, the decisions that are made by the local government really have a much, much greater impact on your day-to-day life than anything done at the state or the national level. Not that those aren't important, but the state and the national level don't determine how many plows are on the street, or how many cops are on the street, or how many fire engines we have. That's the local government. That's a local government decision. These are the people you're electing to make those decisions for you. So this is why this election is important. And I bring this up because voter turnout in local elections is so disappointingly low compared
Decisions are made by 4,000 people out of a city of 28,000.
with 14,000 registered voters. We're not talking about a very high percentage. I mean, it's embarrassingly low for presidential races, but it's even worse at the local level. And the reality is the other thing, just kind of thinking about it from another practical perspective. If I get elected, I live in New London. My phone number is on my literature. So if you see my literature, you'll see my phone number. I also have my email address on there. I have my Facebook page, and we have our URL for our website. You have many ways to get a hold of me. Chances are you'll get me. You can try to call the president. I'm sure he's a really nice guy. But he's probably not going to pick up the phone, and even if you leave him a message, he's probably not going to call you back. And really, he shouldn't be looked down upon for that action. The reality is he can't possibly get to everybody's phone call. But at a local level, there's really no excuse for an elected official to not get back to you. And so you have an opportunity not only to impact the race because there are fewer voters, but you have an opportunity to influence decision-making during the 2 years that person serves, or the 4 years in the case of the mayor, because they are accessible, or they better be accessible, because that is really the role of local government is accessibility to the public.
And in the last minute, I want to give a pitch to people to vote in this election. It seems as though the mayoral primary took a lot of energy out of the New London local election. Both in an official level, there's less newspaper coverage than there was 2 years ago of the council and board of ed candidates. And I hear a lot of people on the street just say, oh, I'm just done. I voted in the primary, and either I'm happy or I'm not happy, but I'm done.
Yeah, no, and that's really a good point, Rana. Regardless of how people felt about the outcome of that election, that was step one, or I think in the case of anybody who's not a Democrat, that was step zero, because Republicans and Greens were not involved in that election.
You're done.
Oh, okay. We'll see you next week, and thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
It's like the forums, huh? The time card's up.
I was raised down at Fort Trumbull, around me. What's now a blighted neighborhood, overlooking a river to the sea. Having an ill decent Christmas, where I become Christmas time. I smell lemon eviction coming round in London this Christmas time. It don't smell so good down by that sewer plant. Down before Santa comes to town. They want to build themselves a hotel, but you think they'll spread that wealth around? Now think again. Jody Rell can't even stop them when they come to tear my poor old house down. Oh, here comes the wrecking balls. Having an ill decent Christmas. Son, be at your house, not mine. Having an ill decent Christmas, where I become Christmas time. I smell an imminent eviction coming down to New London this Christmas time. Oh, Lord have mercy. Oh, no, it's starting to snow. Tell me, where am I gonna go? Here comes the Scrooge, the one to blame. Well, if it